So let's talk through the full roster of Games Workshop's Border Patrol value sets, with a tier list of which ones are best and which ones are worst. Hello and welcome back to Warsbets Tactics, where today we're talking boarding patrols, and with the vast majority of them out now, I thought we'd do a bit of a tier ranking with which ones people are looking to pick up the most. I suspect that most of you watching will probably be familiar with what these boarding patrol boxes are. They're Games Workshop 40K boxes, broadly aimed at Arks of Omen. You can make a boarding patrol force out of them, though a lot of people just want to pick them up for the main 40k game anyway. They cost around £65 to £80 or $115 to $140 depending on which one it is. And for this video I thought I'd broadly base it just on broad popular appeal. I asked you guys to rate each of the boarding patrols out of 5, and I thought we'd go through the results in a rough tier ranking. We'll start with the ones that you were underwhelmed with, then the middling ones, then the good ones, then the ones that you think were best. At time of recording it looks like Games Workshop hasn't announced the vast majority of them. There might be a few more for potentially Guard, Votann and World Eaters, though that's not confirmed yet. Plus a fair few of the announced ones haven't actually released yet, so we don't know what their price will be. Obviously any big surprises might well change things, but for the most part they do seem to be at least fairly consistent in discount, somewhere between 35 and 45%, roughly somewhere along that measure. In any case, let's jump straight into it though, starting with the ones that you rated as not so great. Here we have the Chaos Demons and the Tyranids, the two least popular boarding patrols out of the 16 that were announced so far. It seems that the boarding patrol that was voted bottom by really quite a wide margin was Boarding Patrol Chaos Demons. This one only scored a measly 2.5 scores out of 5, the next competitor at Tyranids being 2.9. In this one you get Karanak, 10 Bloodletters and 10 Fleshhounds, and Games Workshop's price for it is already announced, $130, and if you bought the kit separately it'll be $200 in the box, so around about a 35% discount. Not particularly terrible from Games Workshop, but on the lower end of the ones that we know the prices for. I think another interesting metric to measure it by is how many points are in the box. This one's only 370, and again it's really at the lower end. To be fair, that's partly due to Fleshhounds coming down in points quite so much that it dropped really quite a lot. I feel like this box is a weak one on multiple different metrics, to be honest. The biggest deal is that it just has far too much overlap with the Combat Patrol. That Combat Patrol is mainly Fleshhounds and Bloodletters already, so why they decided we needed a second box like that I don't know. Also, this one on paper seems to be a worse discount than the Combat Patrol boxes. It also seems like a really strange decision why this one is Khorne Demons again when there's 3 other deities to choose from. Why not Slaanesh or Nurgle, for example? I guess Karanak is the biggest reason to buy it, as you don't get him in the main Combat Patrol, and isn't normally available at discounts being direct only. Might be useful for some, but generally it's an all-around weak box I think. The discount isn't great, the points are on the lower end, and also it's redundant to the Combat Patrol, about as unexciting as a Games Workshop discount box can be perhaps. The other one that was rated down here at 2.9 stars out of 5 are the Tyranids. In this one you get the Broodlord and Genestealers plus 6 Tyranid Warriors. Again we know the price from Games Workshop for this one, $130, £80 or €105. Very slightly more models in the box, a tiny bit more of a discount at 37. This one, to be fair, does have a fair few more points in the box than the Demons, around about 90 points more, depending on how exactly you equip those Tyranid Warriors. In general, I'd say this one just maybe doesn't have particularly exciting models in it. The Broodlord's been discounted a fair few times before. The Genestealers are super old sculpts, and I think have a pretty high chance of being replaced by new models in the near future with a Tyranid release on the horizon. Plus, Tyranid Warriors aren't considered an amazingly good value kit for the price of the models. Even with their new higher points cost, they're generally seen as fairly bad value for the money. Still definitely not unusable, though I'd be a little bit more wary of picking this up compared with some other times. I think it will be quite a disappointing move if we do wind up getting Genestealers out as a new miniature very soon, and this one winds up just being a drive to sell old stock. Moving on, we've got the box sets that were voted in lower mid tier. These were voted in the low 3 stars, and there was quite a jump between these ones and the next group up. Here we have the Drukhari one, Space Marines, Adeptus Custodes, Admech, Thousand Sons, and Eldar. Firstly, for the Drukhari of Comera, their boarding patrol was voted 3.1, still pretty low to be honest, and not much higher than the Tyranids. In theirs you get a Succubus, 20 Witches, and 5 Incubi, around about 400 points in the box, so fairly low there. And we're moving into the territory of the ones that we don't know the final price from Games Workshop yet. But in terms of value in the box, this one's a bit lower than the previous two, $179. Hopefully compared with some of the rest, it's charged at a bit of a lower price accordingly. Basically, this one's just very, very witch heavy. I guess it's not too terrible if you did want to add a witch cult element to your Drukhari army, fairly nice and focused. And the Incubi are among their more recent sculpts, not a particularly bad pickup with them being pretty effective in game as well. Even if it is costed as cheap as the cheapest combat patrols so far though, it looks like it'll be fairly low savings at best. I guess people just aren't particularly happy with it as it's putting a whole load of witches on the board, and that's only one of the three elements of the Drukhari army, perhaps just doesn't really feel very balanced. I feel like out of the Drukhari sub-factions as well, the Cabals tend to be a bit more popular than the Cults. I guess I think they could have made it a bit more exciting by trading out one of those units of witches for something else maybe, though what they chose might have been a bit more up for debate. Voted just slightly ahead of the Drukhari on 3.2 stars was the Space Marines Boarding Patrol. This one's got the Gravis Captain, 5 Heavy Intercessors, and 10 Assault Intercessors. Really quite cheap from Games Workshop at £65 or $110, and it didn't turn out to be particularly generous on the discounts either, around about 33% off, which is the lowest out of any of the boarding patrols. The points in the box were pretty cheap as well, though admittedly the box was cheaper than most, so I guess the points per dollar, for example, maybe wasn't the worst compared with some of the rest. I feel like out of this box, the Gravis Captain was the exciting thing. He's a fairly new sculpt with a few cool weapon options. I feel like Space Marine boxes often tend to go pretty heavy on the troops with bolters, and this one's not really the biggest exception. Lots of people have Assault Intercessors at this point, they came in all the Indomitus boxes and things, and the Heavy Intercessors seem to have been appearing in a whole ton of different discount boxes. I feel like there's a bit of theory that Games Workshop might be trying to clear some back stock of them, as they haven't been selling quite as well as they were expecting, perhaps because they're inexplicably just priced a bit higher than the other Intercessors, despite only being 5 models. Obviously still not unusable if you do want the specific units, but I feel like a lot of Space Marine players are already going to have one of the units in abundance. Next up, we've got Boarding Patrol Custodes, which was a fairly highly anticipated one. I feel like people have been quite enjoying the recent Custodes discounts, a really cheap combat patrol, then that excellent Christmas battle force, and I feel like perhaps people felt a little bit let down by this one, just because it happens to have Trajan Valoris in it just the same as the Christmas one. So if you bought that, or you'd already picked up Trajan elsewhere, this one's going to have far less value. As well as him, you also get 3 Alarus Terminators and 5 Custodian Guards. It does appear to be very low in terms of the cost of models in the box, meaning that it's likely to have a fairly bad discount unless Games Workshop go lower than usual for their pricing. Even if they costed it as cheap as the Space Marine box set, that's still only 33%, it will be one of the lowest discounts out of any of them. Still though, on the flip side, this box definitely isn't all bad. You get 615 points in the box, which is one of the best out of any of the boarding patrols. Custodes just get you a whole ton of points in game. And admittedly, if you did miss out on the Christmas Battle Force box, this one pairs absolutely excellently with the Combat Patrol if you wanted to pick up both. This one plus the Combat Patrol paired just seems like an excellent way to break into Custodes, to be honest. I think people might have quite liked to see a squad of Wardens in this one perhaps. They're one of the Custodes kits that hasn't been discounted yet in a while. Might have been another interesting way to shake something up. Next up, we've got the Admech Boarding Patrol, again one that's not gone over particularly well. I feel like we've not seen a whole ton of Admech discount boxes that we've had good reactions to in a while, I guess partly due to them being such an expensive faction to play, full stop. In this one there's the Tech Priest Dominus, 5 Rust Stalkers that you can build as infiltrators, 3 Cataphron Servitors, and 10 Skitari. This one's one of the more expensive ones from Games Workshop at $140 or £85, and gets you $215 worth of models in the box, again a discount on the lower side at about 35%. Again, like the Daemons as well, this one's got fewer points in the box than most, only 370. Admech really are expensive to get points on the board for. This one really feels quite similar to the Combat Patrol in quite a lot of ways. You've got the squad of the Cataphrons and the regular Skitari troops, and then they just swapped out the vehicle with the Rust Stalkers and the Tech Priest with the Dominus. I think perhaps that's part of the reason for people not being as impressed. They've discounted those Cataphrons and the Servitors in just about every box set. Maybe they could have swapped out one of the troop squads for some Electro Priests or something, maybe. Certainly not terrible, though. The Dominus is a pretty core HQ for the faction, and the Rust Stalkers and Infiltrators are both really quite good in game and haven't been discounted too much. They'd probably be the gem of the box, in my opinion. Just above them we have the Thousand Suns. These guys were voted in at 3.3. A bit of an unusual boarding patrol box this one, 20 Rubik Marines and 2 Chaos Spawn. Again, not known pricing on this one yet, but it's $175 worth of models in the box. This one's on the lower end, so if the pricing is anything but on the lower end, it's not going to be such a great deal. In terms of points, it is more than most. The Rubric Marines do get you a fair amount of points on the board for the cost. If anything, the Spawn bring that down quite a bit, seeing as they cost quite so much individually, plus cost almost nothing on the board. Overall, I can see why people maybe aren't so excited about this. Just 2 copies of the basic troops unit, and then the Chaos Spawn, which is seen as fairly bad value. £15 per model for a 20-point monster on the board, plus a model that's maybe showing its age a little bit. But on the other hand, I can see the people who actually want this, seeing it as quite a useful box set to pick up. If you are low on Rubric Marines, this is almost certainly going to get you some at a discount. Spawn are a genuinely quite good unit at the moment. You could potentially kit bash more from the kit, as there's lots of mutations and bits. Wouldn't be hard to make 1 or 2 more with an extra base or so. And depending on the final price, if this does work out as slightly cheaper discounted rubrics with free spawn included too, I can see it being quite popular for people who just wanted to fill out the ranks of the Dusty Legion. I think it does pair really quite nicely with the Combat Patrol, to be honest. That one gets you the Terminators and Zangors, so giving you a big focus on rubrics and spawn would give you quite a well-rounded force, I think. Next up, we've got the Craftworlds. These were voted the same at 3.3, and I do find this one to be a bit of a peculiar one. It's a very split box with Howling Banshees and Corsairs, 2 different themes within the Craftworld army, with really quite a different feel to them. Admittedly, all of these really are quite new recent sculpts. The Howling Banshees are fairly nice models and pretty effective in game, and the Corsairs are some of the more recent Eldar models, being their kill team kits that you can build some specialists with, and this one gets you 2 copies of the models, so you could fill out a whole bunch of troops units if you'd wanted to. In terms of cost of models in the box, this one's $222. This one's definitely on the higher end, so even if it's priced along with things like AdMech, it will be a slightly better discount than most. The points are pretty good as well, around about 430 depending on how you build the Corsairs. If you go for the troops, it's going to be a bit less. If you go for the elites and use their specialists and things, it'll be a bit more. I would say that maybe this one doesn't feel like an enormously cohesive force. I'll probably just see it as a bit more of an expansion pack for Eldar armies if you did want these units. I feel like it's fairly conceivable that you'd have a fair few Craftworld collectors that wouldn't have any of the models in this box, and for them it could be quite an interesting addition to add some different elements to their army. Still though, it's not really one of the more popular ones. I feel like despite being pretty cool models, the Corsairs just aren't super desirable to add in with the rest of the army. They just feel a bit peripheral and different, as opposed to adding to your army's main theme, perhaps. Now we're starting to get up into the more popular stuff, though. People have rated these as significantly better than the last tier, with star ratings in the higher 3s. Here we've got the Genestealer Cult one, the Grey Knight one, Necrons, Orks, and Sisters of Battle. First up, we've got the Genestealer Cult one. This one's got a Kellamorph and Abominant, 5 Aberrants, and 10 Acolyte Hybrids, basically 2 copies of that kit. Quite a nice mix of miniatures there, 2 of the Genestealers' interesting support characters, 2 boxes of the very expensive troops, plus the Aberrants to do a bit of heavy lifting. Their box set's kind of middling in terms of price, $125, £75 or €100, and they charge $202 for the models in the box, around about a 39% discount, a bit better than many. The points are still maybe a little bit underwhelming for how much you pay, 420 points, low to middling-ish, but maybe not as bad as it could be. Genestealer Cult do tend to be an expensive army to collect. In general, this one does seem to have gone down fairly well. I guess the model mix is quite a nice one, the Kellamorph's quite a fun character, and genuinely quite a potent little assassin in game. The Acolyte Hybrids are a unit that you generally want quite a few of in the Genestealer Cult army, quite a helpful one to have discounted in multiples, seeing as they're really expensive just on their base cost. And the Aberrants are maybe a little bit more underwhelming in game, but I feel like they're a unit that often tends to bounce back, being the heavy hitters of the army. Again, I feel like this one pairs pretty well with the other discounts on offer. Getting this in addition to the Combat Patrol is a really nice start, and then add maybe that 3-character Brood Coven, and you've got a fairly good going Genestealer Cult army, not bad for a usually very expensive faction. Next up, and voted slightly higher by you guys at 3.7 stars, we've got the Grey Knights, a fairly nice simple box set this one. The new Castellan Crow model, 10 Strike Marines and 5 Terminators. The Grey Knights don't exactly have the biggest miniature choice on offer, so I guess it generally was going to be Strike Marines and Terminators in the box. The Strikes can build all their other usual variants. Again, no price from Games Workshop as of yet, but it's $170 worth of models. Again on the low side, so hopefully they'll be cheap, priced similar to the Space Marine one, otherwise the discount's going to be fairly low. In terms of points, it's kind of medium at 460 roughly here, obviously varying a little bit depending on how you equip the various miniatures, and overall I feel like it's hard to go too far wrong with this one. Both of the core Grey Knight choices, plus their most recent character, Seems handy enough, and again could pair okay with a combat patrol. That's to build you out to 10 Terminators and 15 Strike Marines. Ranked the same by you guys are the Necrons, 3.7 stars out of 5. And I must say it's a fairly meaty box, both in terms of the amount of cost that this would be, plus just the raw amount of models that you get in the box. 10 Necron Warriors, 3 Scarab Swarms in that same kit, 3 Ophidian Destroyers, and then 10 Lich Guard that you can also build as Triarch Praetorians. Usually they come in kits of 5, so having 2 sets of those isn't too bad. Again, pricing is unconfirmed, so Games Workshop I guess do have the potential to disappoint us there. If it is priced the same as, say, AdMech, though, the most expensive that we've had so far, then the discount on this one will be quite good. Points-wise, it's about 485, depending on how you build the models. More or less on the upper end of them, I'd say. And in general, this does look like a pretty decent chunk of Necron reinforcement. I think it's quite nice that the 2 Elite's Choice units you could build as either Triarchs or Lich Guard, or 1 unit of each. Means that it's got quite a lot of value, even if people have already got some of those units in their army. The Ophidian Destroyers are quite nice to see here, as relatively recent Necron units. Maybe the Necron Warriors are a little bit low value at the moment, seeing as they've been about so cheap in 9th edition from the Recruit box set, but they're rarely going to be the worst models in the world to have in fairly good numbers. Overall pretty solid, and I feel like it's quite nice to see kits that don't have to pay a character tax for one of their miniatures. This just gets you a really big chunk of the Necron battle line, and perhaps isn't too surprising that it gets you a fair amount of points on the board as a result. Necron's internal balance isn't too bad at the moment as well. I'd say all of these are pretty usable in game, particularly the Destroyers, Warriors and Scarabs. Finally, for the last 2 of this tier that were voted really quite highly by you guys, ranked 3.9 out of 5 are the Orks, this one being one of the 2 new interesting ones that get a unique character here. We've got new boss Snickrot in this one in his new plastic miniature, which is pretty cool, and he leads 10 Beast Snaggers, 10 Commandos and 5 Flash Kits into the fray. Again, pricing's unannounced for this one. It looks like there's $225 worth of models in the box. I'd guess it's going to be one of the more pricey ones, probably similar to the AdMech one, maybe $140. If it's any lower, then that will be quite good though. Again, I think it's fairly good in terms of the raw models that you get. As they go, most of them are relatively recent Orc sculpts. The Flash Kits are the oldest, but the Beast Snaggers and the Commandos are from the latest release wave, and Snickrot's completely new. Not exactly the biggest amount of points at 420, but I'm still not surprised to see this one as popular. Lots of recent new miniatures and some really nice quality ones like those Commandos, and nice to see some new Beast Snaggers discounted as well, seeing as we have the other newer Orc kit in the Combat Patrol. Lastly for this tier we've got the Sisters of Battle Boarding Patrol. This one was also voted at 3.9, slightly ahead of the Orcs. In this one we've got the Canoness, 10 Repentia including the Superior, 10 Battle Sisters, the multi-part plastic kit, and 5 Celestian Sacrosancts. Again, in terms of numbers of models, it is on the higher side from Games Workshop, so again, wouldn't be too surprised if this was one of the slightly more pricey boarding patrols, but even then, the discount's not likely to be dreadful. There's 430 points worth of models in the box, depending on exactly what gear that you give the standard Battle Sisters, or whether you equip them as things like Dominions, which you can do. I'd say the box set does maybe have a bit of overlap with the Combat Patrol, but maybe not the most unhelpful things ever. You get the monopose options in that box, so you get the multi-part options here besides the Repentia. Having the Repentia isn't the worst as well, in addition to the Combat Patrol set, as that set only gets you a very small miniature. I'd say the Sacrosancts are perhaps the pick of the box though. Really quite a nice unit for the Sisters in game, and perhaps a slightly more recent one that not every player might have in their collections. Finally then, I guess that gets us into our top 3. In the top tier, we've got these 3 as voted best boarding patrols by you guys rating them. Here we've got the Death Guard one, the Chaos Space Marines and the Tower Empire, just slightly ahead of the ones just mentioned. All of these boarding patrols just nosed into the 4-star plus. Death Guard were rated 4 stars out of 5, and in this one you get the Lord of Virulence, 10 Plague Marines and then 3 Death Shroud Terminators, perhaps kind of similar to the Grey Knight one perhaps. A useful HQ, a decent amount of the core troops, and then some Fighty Shock elites. The Plague Marines have the more flexible kit of 7 of them, then they have those 3 unique pose Plague Marine reinforcements. Games Workshop were a bit weird with their kit, giving the main kit a very fluffy number of 7, but then selling the other 3 at a kind of big markup. They cost a lot more per model. It is quite nice to see the entire set of them all in one box though. The cost from Games Workshop for this one was $115, £70 or €90. Given that the contents would be sold from Games Workshop at $205 separately, it worked out to be around about a 44% discount, massively better than most. Still though, given that you are having that very expensive set of 3 Plague Marines in this, it probably does take the shine off a bit, but it still works out to be a good deal, at least compared with some of their other options. In the box there's 460 points, fairly reasonable, and seeing as the box is a cheaper one, not the worst. And to be honest, I felt like if this would be a permanent addition to the range, and a different option to Combat Patrol Death Guard, I feel like a lot of people would probably choose to start with this one, to be honest, rather than the Horde of Poxwalkers that you get in the Combat Patrol box set. What's more, the models are all decent enough in game at the moment, the Lord's pretty usable, the Death Shroud Terminators are nice fighty elites, and the Plague Marines are in particular very standout, lots of scary free war gear with dangerous plague weapons. Overall, people just seem to think that this is fairly good value for what you get. Also voted on 4 stars out of 5 as well is the Chaos Space Marine one. This one was the second one released after the Space Marines, and in this there was Abaddon the Despoiler, 20 Chaos Cultists, and then 10 Chaos Legionaries, and they also get the Kill Team upgrade sprue in there, so you get things like the Chain Cannon plus the Balefire Tome. I think it's a pretty interesting box set, to be honest. Having a character of Abaddon stature in one of these boarding patrols is pretty mad. Then you get quite a decent amount of grunts to fill the line, and the core troops choice for the faction. The Kill Team sprue is extra added value. This one's kind of medium in terms of pricing, maybe a little bit on the higher side, $130, £80 or €105. But if you were to buy these kits from Games Workshop separately, it'd be $240, so around about a 46% discount there, the best out of any of them that we know so far. It's really not too bad by Games Workshop standards, the cultists are seen as pretty pricey for what they are, but Abaddon's sculpt is very popular, and the Kill Team set of the Chaos Legionaries is fairly good value both in terms of the models and the points, I think. Speaking of which, largely due to the Despoiler himself, the points in the box comes to 630 as well. This makes it the single best in terms of getting points of models on the board for the cost, quite impressive considering how many 5-point cultists it contains. I feel like this probably isn't going to be the box that's going to be the one for every single Chaos Space Marine collector. If you don't collect Black Legion, Abaddon just might not fit with your force, I suppose, even if he can be fielded with most. If you do already have a copy of him, it's also not going to be particularly useful. Otherwise though, all the models are solid enough in game at the moment, Cultists for cheap objective grabbing, and the Legionaries got a fair bit more interesting with discounted gear, and Abaddon really is a powerhouse melee character, and very nice with his buffs in Black Legion. Overall though, a very solid box, and I'm not surprised that it scored pretty high here. Finally last, and voted the highest out of any of these boxes, is the Tau Empire set. I feel like Games Workshop is going to sell a fair few of these, mainly with people drawn to getting the new Commander Farsight model. His miniature seems to have gone down very well with most people, some cool samurai vibes there with his Dawn Blade, and fairly cool stylized battle suit, and then he's backed up by 3 Crisis suits plus 6 drones, and then 10 Fire Warriors plus 2 drones and a turret. I feel like between all of that there's just not really all that much not to like. Crisis suits are perhaps one of the most iconic units for Tau Empire, plus are a powerhouse in game at the moment, using a lot of their codex's buffs to maximum effectiveness, and Fire Warriors are a pretty iconic troops choice as well, plus are genuinely getting used in game quite a lot more than they were, either as Breacher Devilfish or small units of strike squads to hold the line. We don't know Games Workshop's pricing for it yet, or the price that Farsight will eventually be individually when he does release individually. My guess though, based on other similar releases like Shadowsun, is that it looks like it's about $195 worth of models in the box, and I feel like that does mean that discount could be a bit meh if it's priced fairly high, and I suspect the Games Workshop might price it quite high due to having new Farsight in it. In terms of points in the box, it's around about 500 on this one, really quite good comparatively, one of the better ones, and I think it's highly likely that Farsight's going to be getting a new datasheet update as well to go along with this, probably having more abilities and costing more, similarly to the recent updated Azrael. Overall, looks like this one's the winner of the vote so far though. A really popular new character, alongside 2 of the most useful units for the faction, hard to go too far wrong there. Wrapping up, I thought we'd just take a look at the list for the rankings by your vote, the rough points in the box, and the discount. Here we have the scoring, really quite a lot that are ranked fairly high. Tau, Death Guard, Chaos Sisters and Orks are the most popular ones, and Chaos Demons are by far the weakest in your eyes, followed up by the Tyranids. In terms of points in the box, I feel like the lists track at least fairly well. Not perfect with all of them, of course. The Chaos Space Marines are the highest there, followed by the Custodes, with Craftworlds, Thousand Sons and Tau Empire being the next ones. There are a few that have really quite low points though. Demons, Admech and Space Marines are going to struggle to form a 500 points boarding patrol out of these. Finally, rather than going through the dollars of models in the box, which I think is a bit pointless seeing as we don't know the price of the new ones, here are just the ones with the discounts that we know. Seems like Chaos Space Marines and Death Guard head this one up quite significantly, though part of that for the Death Guard is made up of those pretty expensive extra sculpt for the Plague Marine box. Admech Demons and Space Marines make up the lowest three for this so far, bottoming them out both in terms of discount and in terms of points. Maybe not too surprising to see why they scored low on the voting. I'll be interested to hear your guys' thoughts though. What do you make of these box sets, and which would you be tempted to pick up? Look forward to hearing your ideas down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to see more like this, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to keep up with Games Workshop's news and releases as they come out. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below. The channel's Patreon is what allows me to keep all this content coming quite so regularly, with new videos out just about every day. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.